After all you've seen, after all the evidence, why can't you believe?
I'm afraid.
The iconic X-Files pop culture phrase, "I want to believe," is different than "I believe." The "I want to believe" statement is filled with wonder and doubt, but also digs deep into our personal fears and leaves us wondering, what if this is it? What if this is all there is? Faith is a divine trust in a thing or a person, while belief is a mental state in which trust is placed in something. Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka is a writer and professor of religious studies at the University North Carolina, Wilmington, and chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion. Joins me to discuss belief systems and structures within the UFO community. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Dr. Diana Pasulka, thank you for joining me on Rebelliously Curious. So you are a writer professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and also the chair and Department of Philosophy and Religion. So I would like to ask you, how did you get involved into the area of studying religion and philosophy? Before we even get into the UFO topic, how did you get involved in that area of study?
Okay, sure. So some people, okay, I started really young. I was interested in, like questions like time. I didn't quite, couldn't wrap my head around like the idea of infinity and stuff like that, and kind of outing myself as a geeky kid, and I was, and so my parents had a library because they were interested in things in philosophy. My dad took philosophy courses at the University of California at Berkeley. And so they had these, this library, and I spent a lot of time in it just reading about philosophers. And that's pretty much what happened, how it happened. I was, it formed me as a kid. And I still have those questions. They're not questions that actually can be answered, but they're questions that people have to continue to ask. So I guess that's why I'm still asking those questions so many years later.
Yeah, and I can understand that. How did UFOs become part of this area of study in religion and philosophy for you then?
Yeah, so that wasn't planned at all. If you had said to me 10 and a half years ago, you would be, writing a book and people would be talking about it, and, you would be known in this community, I would have said you were pretty crazy and said, no way, that's the last thing I'd be doing. So how did it happen? And actually now I feel like that's pretty much what I've been doing my whole life, because what is this, we call them UFOs, but what is this that we're studying? And so basically, this is how it happened. I had been studying about what I call contact events, which are extraordinary events in religion, and especially in the history of Catholicism, which is my field. And so I'd look at things like, saints who levitate, and, the ways in which people believed in these back in the day. And I would do a lot of research in archives and things like that. And what I found was that I published a lot of stuff, and I found that I would accumulate a lot of stuff that had to do with aerial phenomena, basically stuff out there in the sky that looked pretty weird. People didn't know how to interpret it. They'd interpret it as maybe souls from purgatory or angels or, demons or things like that. And sometimes even people from other planets, right? So they would have that theory as well. They did have the ETH theory, right? Extraterrestrial hypothesis. So, from the 1200s, that was a thing. So, all right. So I had this big list of things. I really didn't know what to think of them. And after my book, I published a book on purgatory. And after that was published, I had to publish something different. I thought I was going to publish a book about this bishop here in the South, John England. But I showed this list to my friend and I said, what do you think of all this stuff, And he read through it and he thought about it and he said, yeah, this looks like Steven Spielberg's like UFO stuff. And I just laughed at him and I said, that's crazy, that's not what that's about. But then in this research, I think a lot of people who do this research can corroborate the fact that a lot of weird coincidences happen. And one of the coincidences that happened early on was that there was a UFO conference in my town. And so just after this had happened, I attended this conference because I thought maybe he's right. And so I attended this conference and I heard people talk about their experiences. And I thought, wow, the patterns are similar. So I decided to take what all the tools of the trade, that I learned from grad school and everything, and as being a professor, and I applied them to UFOs. I thought it would be easy, frankly. I thought it would be an easy book to write. Look, what was going on back here is kind of going on today. And, what are people saying about it today? I literally did not know that the things that happened would happen. And right away, I realized that this territory of research was very strange and that, it kind of reoriented my whole life and the way I thought about things. So that's really how it happened. It wasn't on purpose.
Wow. And I think a lot of people find themselves in the UFO community and from all different areas, because it's obviously an area of study. So you kind of, I think you become fascinated you find out more information and research about it. And then you find yourself going down, these rabbit holes. Before we go into again, the larger conversation, I would just like to kind of put some, markers down about religion and and belief. So what's the difference between faith and belief?
Sure. Actually, they're kind of similar, actually. Okay. So belief is a huge category for people in the university. So there are different ways of studying belief. In its most general sense, belief is basically attitudes. Belief are attitudes that we have towards events or things. And those attitudes could be correct or incorrect. They could be true or not true. They could be true or false. So beliefs could be true or false, but they're definitely attitudes and behaviors toward events, things, people. So let's take the sun rising tomorrow. Well, it's risen. We have a lot of evidence that it has risen now for, how our whole lives. Therefore, we have faith that it will rise tomorrow, but it could very well not rise tomorrow. Okay, but we believe it will. So belief is, in its most general sense, is that. And when we talk about religion, and if I correlate it, say, to studies of UFOs and things like that, you don't really have a lot of evidence, hard evidence for extraterrestrials, right? We just don't. We have some evidence for it now, but that takes faith to believe in. We have a lot of testimonial evidence. We have credible witnesses. Well, you have that in religion as well. You have people saying, yes, we saw this man, he died and now he's alive, he resurrected. You have a lot of testimonial evidence, and religious traditions are built on testimonial evidence, but they're not built on hard evidence. Okay.
Right.
So what I was going to do basically was look at UFOs as kind of a new form of religious belief, a new religiosity in a sense. And then all these things started happening, like, the New York Times, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, published their New York Times articles, and then the government comes out, and, all these things happened while I had been writing my book. I also met people in these programs who said, yes, we actually do have super hard evidence for this. And I realized that this was all going to form a new type of belief system. And so that's where I feel I'm at right now. I'm still doing the same thing and immersed in the same communities. So I hope that explains what, kind of how someone from my field would then approach the study of UFOs like a belief structure.
Yeah. And what are the gauges? What are the marks that make something a religion?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question, because I think that most of us just assume we know what a religion is because we're in the United States, right? And so in our country, a good portion of people in our country believe in Christianity. So they just assume that religions look like Christianity. They have a God, they're historical, these people exist. And well, actually, that's not what religions look like all over the world. And some cultures don't even have something they call a religion. So if you go to North American indigenous cultures, they have spiritualities. They don't even have a word for this thing called religion. So religions are basically things that are beliefs and practices directed towards something that's perceived to be of sacred or transforming power. So that's the kind of more general idea of what a religion is. They could have gods, but they don't have to. Okay. So they're basically belief systems based on beliefs and practices towards something that someone thinks is transformative. And you definitely get that in the UFO community. A lot of people who are experiencers have had pretty transformative experiences. And so that's how, and people in my field have traditionally, studied UFO belief. There are quote unquote UFO religions, Nation of Islam, right? So Scientology also has some aspects of UFOs, but Scientology is one of those things in my field that people argue, is it a religion or is it not a religion, right? So so there are historical religions like Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and then there are new religious movements, right? So today there are people who follow Judaism, the religion that actually came out of Star Wars. So this is obviously a new type of religion, right? So I was looking at UFOs as a new form of how people believe in things that are transformative.
Yeah, because you've led me right into my next question and getting into the concept of UFOs and extraterrestrials, because UFOs are different than, I would say, than the concept of, there is a belief around UFOs, but people believe that, the ET philosophy, and if there is a religion around it. So the question I ask then is, the concept of believing in extraterrestrials like a new North American religion, or is it a new religion that's evolving right now?
That's a great question. So, I mean, there are a lot of people who are looking, they have a very legitimate academic, job at MIT or whatnot, of looking for planets that are habitable, looking for planets that, if we actually, have a crisis on this planet, can we actually go to those planets and live there? So, so that's a legitimate field of study that's been going on for many years. And I have friends who do that. And that, when they're doing that, that's completely different than what's happening when people are being quote unquote abducted by aliens, right? So the people I know who are involved in the study of, say, astrobiology or, that type of thing, they're actually just out there looking for what could possibly be an extraterrestrial thing, right? An extraterrestrial object, or habitable planets that might have microbial life or something like that. And that doesn't have to have any faith-based, that doesn't have to be faith-based, because you can say there's microbial life on this exoplanet, right? You don't have to say, I believe that there is, and then, and then have people question you because you show that. So that's completely and entirely different than this idea of ETs that are in telepathic communication with people, which is another thriving belief, right? That people have. And I knew a lot of people who are scientists who believe that and create technologies based on this belief. So, you have to kind of put these in different categories, I think.
Yeah. And you brought up astrobiology. And what are the connections then between astrobiology and Christian theology right now that we're seeing?
Okay, so there's this article that's going around right now that I think it gets misinterpreted because the person who is writing this book, and then an article comes out about it, basically where he says that NASA hired theologians to discuss, what's the impact of potential extraterrestrial finds, right? So how will that ruin religion? Or make people disbelieve in their religions and things like that. I definitely don't think that's the case. But let me talk a little bit about this particular article and how it's been interpreted and spun.
I would love that.
So this has been happening for many, many years. So NASA, along with even the Vatican, and along with theological institutions like the Graduate Theological Institution, where I got my master's degree, or Harvard Divinity School, they've all been in this conversation. A lot of it gets funded by like the Templeton Foundation, NASA, has funds for it. The Vatican has funds for it. And what they're doing is they're basically talking about the implications of discovering even the microbial life planet. What will happen when people know that we could possibly go to other planets, or that there could possibly be life elsewhere. So with respect to that specific article, these kinds of conferences have been going on actually very quietly, because nobody really pays attention to them for a long time. They don't write press releases, because they're, the people that are doing this, they're just academics. They're just normal academics. This is their job, or their job is to be a professor of theology or something like that. So it's not something that is, it's not something that's subversive, right? So NASA doesn't surreptitiously then pay these people, to get information about how people are going to react or anything like that. It's not controversial in my opinion at all. It's been going on for a long time. And there's actually a group called the Association of Catholic Scientists and the Association of American Catholic Scientists. And they have, every year they dedicate at least some of their conference to talking about the search for extraterrestrial life. And this is, like I said, it's not controversial. It's actually very interesting. They talk about technology. I've been invited to these conferences. It's not really such a big deal, I guess, but the media makes it out to be like this big deal. But I think it's just people doing their job here.
Yeah. Hey, and I think I'm glad you said that. I'm glad that you've pointed out that it's been happening for a really long time. And this isn't just brand new news, right? It's just brand new because the conversations of UFOs are, trendy right now. And, and everybody is talking about it in all different parts of politics, entertainment, and even theology now. There is a part of the article that I do, and I'm hopefully this, is that it was Rev Dr Andrew Davidson that was talking about the many incarnations of Jesus Christ. So I asked this because is the concept of microbial life and then Christian theology on top of it, say we even find ET, is that going to be part of a concept of, them being ETs being part of an incarnation of Jesus Christ, or is there going to stick to the one narrative that there's just one? Where do you think that's going to go if we ever, came across the concept of microbial life or even just ET, more intelligent life than us?
Sure. So, okay. And again, this is surprising, I think, for a lot of people to know, but Christians have been thinking about this for a long time. So in the 1700s, actually, 1750, Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a Christian scientist, basically published a book called Life on Other Planets, where he himself had some extraordinary experiences where he believed he was in touch with extraterrestrials. And so he basically said, and this is in 1750, right, the 1750s, and it was a bestseller then, okay? So this whole kind of talk about extraterrestrial life and Christianity, it's been around for a long time. And it was even trending back in the day, right, a long time ago. So let's talk about that. So what did he say about it? He said that, they are subject to the same moral laws as we are because there's one God. And so he said that these beings were, are created by that one God. I think that the Christian religion, and remember, there are at least 10,000 different denominations of Christianity. Now, will all of those, they're all very different. Some of them don't even look like the same religion. So how will they then interpret this? I don't know. But within, say, Catholicism, which is the religion that I know best, how is this going to be looked at? I mean, I have some friends who are theologians, who are Christian theologians, and also astrophysicists, and who work in, in space research. And things that they say are, it wouldn't concern them, that it wouldn't make them less religious. It might even make them more religious. And I think that for this part, religion in general, if you take someone who's an atheist, they don't really have categories for non-human intelligence, right? But people who are religious do. So people who have religious traditions, they already think about things like jinn, in the Islamic tradition, or angels in the Christian tradition, and bodhisattvas in the Buddhist tradition. So there are already these things, these entities that are non-human intelligent a life in these traditions. So I think that people who are religious are probably in a better position than, say, humanistic atheists for dealing with it, should it happen.
I love that you brought up I didn't even think about the atheist side of it. Then what do you think atheists will say when there is this concept? Will they just say, well, oh, well, it's just part of a bigger, it's part of a bigger system. But what are the atheist concept then of finding anything that'd be ET or microbial life? Have you spoken to them or any atheist groups about that?
Yeah. I have lots of friends of mine are atheists.
Yeah.
So I think that they're okay with the idea that there could be, like, say, microbial life or something like that. They're like, okay, yeah, of course. But when it starts to get something that looks to be like a religion, like, ETs are in telepathic communication with so-and-so, that's where they're going to draw the line. Because I think that a lot of the atheists I know are also, they pride themselves on being rationalists, right? And they say, well, that's just impossible. The ESP or, telepathy doesn't exist and that kind of thing. So I think that they couldn't really, let's take, like, if we were to look at ET contact, like the movie Arrival, I don't think atheists would be okay with that. Because there's a lot of really weird things in that movie, right? There's the idea of, and then this woman who's a scientist or actually a linguist, she gets in touch with these things, these ETs, and then her whole sense of time changes and her whole worldview expands so that she can see the future and the past. And, that's gonna, I think that'll problematize some atheists, definitely.
Oh, for sure. And so does the concept of extraterrestrial life then threaten the idea of philosophy and religion at all?
Okay, so philosophy and religion are definitely different.
For sure.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So philosophers, I don't think that they'd be as threatened, frankly, because they're philosophers. So, there are a lot of philosophers are thinking about other dimensions. Okay, so they're thinking about the nature of time, which is pretty weird. Okay, so when you start thinking about the nature of time, that's pretty hard to get your mind around. So they're already at a very sophisticated level of thinking about things generally. This is what I've, being around them my whole life. So they're looking at metaphysics and things like that. I don't think that it would, I don't think they'd be upset about it. People in religious studies, they've already been studying this stuff, but the difference is that they've been looking at it as historical phenomena. They haven't been looking at it as if it was real. So all of a sudden, if it comes along that something like this is real, like they have these tic tacs on radar, and some people feel like they've had experiences of the tic tacs, telepathically or something. I think that's gonna be problematic for people in my field. Like, I think they're going to have to deal with it by figuring out a whole new methodology for dealing with this kind of thing, which is what I'm trying to do in my work. I'm trying to basically say, we're at a point where we do have a religiosity, basically, based on UFOs. And now it's becoming something that people believe to be true. Well, that's pretty intense. How is that going to play out? And how do we, as people who study this, how are we up for that challenge? And that's what I'm trying to work out. And it's not easy to work out, by the way.
Oh my gosh, no, not at all. I'm like, not at all. Like, I have a lot of respect for what you do, because looking even at core belief structures and how things break down, and then, history, and then what, looking at what might be happening in the future as well, and how people will react. What, if we come across ET or, again, microbial life. And I always say microbial life because it's important that we note that stuff won't always have to be, extremely intelligent for it to be life. There's two questions here. How will our core belief structures change? And then, or how do you think they will change? And then also the next question I'll ask then after that are, what are the core belief structures within like the ET UFO religion right now? But first, let's start with what are, like, if we come across that, then how will religion's core belief structures change?
Right. So it depends on which religion we're talking about.
For sure. Yep.
So, okay, let's just say that we're talking about Christianity, mainline Protestant churches, and Catholicism.
Yeah.
when Kenneth Arnold had his experience in 1947 of the chevron-shaped craft that he saw,
Yep.
there was a lot of media that was religious based. Okay, so it was very religious, and a lot of people saw this as like the end times, as a sign of the end times. So a lot of people regarded it as something apocalyptic, which is very scary. Okay, so I think we've come far from that position. I think that now that we have people, NASA coming out with press releases sometimes and saying, we're definitely going to find extraterrestrial life, but it's not going to be little green people, right? It's going to be microbial. This is going to happen. This happened in, I think it was 2015. And I had Brother Guy Consolmagno, who is he's the director of the Vatican Observatory, and he was guest speaking in my class. And
Nice.
this was yeah. So there he was guest speaking in my class the day before she said this. And he almost remote viewed her, because he said, when we have this, when we have disclosure that something has been found or something like that, he said, nobody's going to care, because they've already been, except for scientists. Scientists are going to think this is awesome, right? But the general population is going to be, yeah. And so the very next day, the chief scientist of NASA makes this declaration, and I posted for my students, and I said, look, and look at, the most important thing is look at the comments from the people, right? So the people, the comments were exactly as Brother Guy predicted, yeah, we already knew this, yawn kind of thing, right?
Right.
And they've been here for a long time kind of thing. So he predicted that this would happen, and it was. So I think that that's probably the case for a lot of the Christian church. There's certain parts of the church that will view this, and absolutely do view this now, as apocalyptic, right? So as a framework of demons and angels, and kind of like spiritual warfare. And that's a huge part of religion, right? And so I think a lot of people are going to view it like that. It's so intense that they're going to see this as a form of spiritual warfare. A lot of very well-known experiencers already do. So there's that as well. So this is all within the Christian theological framework. Within the Buddhist theological framework, I can't actually speak for that, but I can say from what I've learned is that there's already room within that framework for understanding spaceships and things, extraterrestrial life and things like that. And it's not going to problematize them that much. I guess the main problem is that if there's technology that's going to be had from these discoveries, there will be a push from governments to try to figure that out, and that will be a competitive push.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the Buddhist side of things. When we're looking at like the Buddhist religions or even Muslim religion in this, are they looking at it as some kind of like apocalyptic idea like North American, or is that very opposite, that they're more welcome and don't see it as kind of like a threat narrative?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When you look at these different religions, you have to see that the apocalyptic idea that there's a beginning to time and an end to time, that's definitely a Western tradition. However, it gets imported, right? So it gets imported to Buddhism. There was no apocalyptic Buddhism. Okay, there wasn't, because the time, the idea of time within Hinduism and Buddhism was a spiral. It's more cyclical. It's not beginning and end, kind of as it is in the three Western traditions, which is Judaism, right? So it has a beginning of the time, you have the creation, and then you have the end of time when the Messiah comes, which hasn't happened yet for Jews. And then in Christianity, which comes from Judaism, you have the beginning of time, right? And then you have the apocalypse, which is supposed to happen, right? And so, and then in Islam too. Okay, so these are, and we use in the world now, we're using the Western idea of time, right? So we don't no longer call it, BC or AD, right? We now call it before the Common Era and after the Common Era. But it's still this 0 point where time is supposed to, there's that time, and then there's this time, and it's still this linear progression. So you have to understand that those ideas are then imported into Buddhism and Hinduism. And So maybe today they would view this apocalyptically because it's part of their religion now.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I didn't even have any questions around the Buddhist side of things. And I was like, we can't leave out that part. It's a major part of the world. The other question that I wanted to ask you then is going back to is the core belief. There's multiple different types of, ET religions that we're seeing and that are offshoots that are coming. But what are like some of the common core beliefs that you see now that are rising within the people believing that extraterrestrials are a religion?
Yeah, the core beliefs are absolutely apocalyptic. So when I say apocalyptic, I'm talking about like an end of the world scenario. So a lot of the people who are part of these belief systems think that the saucers are coming back, right? And either they're coming back for a big fight with us, or they're coming back to redeem us, okay, and to save those of us who, kind of like a narrative of redemption. Either way, it's the same kind of idea that we're in an end time scenario. So I think that even people who are less religious minded and think of, well, why are they here kind of thing, things must be at a point where we're at the end of the world. There's a secular apocalyptic idea as well. So what is a secular apocalypse? Well, it's basically that we're killing our environment. This is the idea. I'm not saying that that's true, but I'm saying that this is the idea, that we are damaging our environment so much that UFOs have to land on our, nuclear facilities and tell us that we're messing everything up. And you get this idea, you get this in a lot of the, the children who see UFOs, like the Zimbabwe UFO sighting. You also see this in Australia with the children at, at the schools. Well, these are sightings. These people have grown up and they still say, oh no, we saw those beings. And this is what they told us. So they've told them about kind of like a apocalyptic scenario of, climate change and things like that. So this would be a secular apocalyptic scenario, very similar to the scenarios of the traditional religions, but now it's more secular. And I think a lot of people are on board with that. I think that actually the Dalai Lama said something about that too. Like he talked to John Mack. And so
wow.
there is a conversation between John Mack and the Dalai Lama. And they talk about, what they've said, what the beings have said to the, what the Dalai Lama believes about it. And it has to do with taking care of our environment.
So so we're getting even an Eastern perspective that has apocalyptic expression within the kind of a core belief as well, because we kind of see the difference, right? And I find that interesting because we see the difference in religion now, where we look at like, Christian theology, and then we look at things like Buddhism, how they have differences in just the general religions that we know. And then when we look at, like, we'll just say modern religions, for my lack of words, looking at ET as that religion, that they're actually saying very similar, that there is this apocalyptic threat narrative across all different parts of the continent and around the world. So that's that's interesting. So even bridging now into the conversation of different ET religions, unfortunately, we had groups like Heaven's Gates that happened. I forget what year it was, but it ended up happening. A group of them, obviously it was during when Comet Hale-Bopp was coming. Are we seeing groups like that are a little bit cult-based, but are saying that they're a religion, but they really all are a cult? Are they forming now? Like they did when Heaven's Gates was around. And I believe that there are still some core members to Heaven's Gates as well. I think it's still an active, cult or religion, depending on how they view it or how people would view it, if you're part of it or not. But are we seeing those types of, cult-like activity happening where people are bringing them and saying that they're religions like Heaven's Gates?
Thankfully, no. I mean, we
Right.
see less of that. Let's put it that way. And I think that's a great development. So what I see going on is that with the help of, a lot of people are down on technology, but this is actually a benefit of it. With the help of technology, what's happening is that the belief in UFOs and ETs is becoming it looks less like these cults where you have, and we don't actually use that word in religious studies, but I'm going to use that word because your audience is going to know what I'm talking about. This idea of a charismatic leader who has some relationship with a non-human intelligence. And this charismatic leader then is able to attract people into their, circle. Okay. No, that's going away. What we see now is the diffusion of this belief structure that's being transmitted to us through media and through all kinds of different media, social media, through entertainment media. And in that way, each of us, in a sense, can kind of, have our own interpretation, plug in, if we will. There's no more like mediator, because, that charismatic leader was like a priest, right? Or something like that. Forgive me, priest, for saying this, but, like a person between you and that non-human intelligence. Well, now we have this idea that that non-human intelligence is perhaps something that all of us can access here through, through our phones or something like that, right? So, so it's a very interesting development, and I'm fascinated by how it's going to change belief and how it's going to move from this idea of us personally plugged in, as distinct from being told what to believe by a charismatic figure. I think this is a positive development, frankly.
Yeah. Are you talking about transhumanism? Because I believe that, and I should even ask you this, is my curiosity. I don't know enough about transhumanism, but is that even considered a religion? Because I know a lot of people have negative thoughts about technology and how we're incorporating it into ourselves or maybe even into our body. So is the theory of transhumanism moving into even a religion with a group of people?
Yeah, I think that transhumanism definitely has its kind of like fanatics, right? It's people who are, oh, thank goodness we're going to transcend, our corporeal bodies and, and then be immortal beings, right? And so no, I don't ascribe to that. Okay. But yeah, are we transhuman? We're already transhuman because, think about it. We're already bathed in the frequencies of our technologies. We can't get off the grid, really. And so how is this new infrastructure impacting the ways in which we believe? And so these are questions I think are really interesting because they're definitely changing everything. Just as a professor, I remember going down the hallways of my university and students would be in little groups talking to one another. You walk down the hallways now and every single student, I promise you, is like that, right? So not only is it hurting them physiologically, like it's literally changing the way that their bodies, are working, but it's also changing their brains. It's changing a lot of things. So we're just going to see this exponentially, this kind of exponential change. But what is it doing with respect to religion? It's, the old types of religions were founded by a charismatic person like Buddha, or Jesus or Muhammad or something like that. And then you have these legions of followers where now it's diffuse and decentralized. And I personally think that first, that could be a dangerous thing, because what if somebody can, can run that narrative of what we all see? But I don't think it's working out that way right now. I think that individually people are sharing information about what they believe to be UFOs. They're uploading their own videos and things like that. And I think that's pretty cool, frankly. I like that decentralization.
I do too. I agree. We are becoming we are cyborgs now.
Yeah, we already are.
We're pretty much cyborgs. That's where we're at until Elon Musk comes out with his Neuralink chip. Sorry,
right. Yeah.
It's already in the chimp until we become the chimps and put it in. But yeah, I agree. We are half cyborg now. I want to kind of go into philosophy before we wrap up too. What are modern philosophers saying about UFOs right now, and then also about cultural feedback loops?
Okay, so what are philosophers saying about UFOs right now? Actually, I don't know any philosophers who are talking about UFOs right now.
Interesting. Yeah.
I do know, I have friends who are philosophers, but they're not publishing about it. I know what they think about UFOs, but they're not publishing about it. So it's mostly people who are in religious studies or who are in the sciences. There's a veritable wave of scholarship coming out now by younger professors who now feel like they can actually study this, and they're from all over the place, like social sciences, religious studies, things like that. And that's all going to be published in the next 5 years. That's going to completely change, again, the landscape of what we know and where the questions are. So, and then to your question about feedback loops, can you unpack that a little bit more so I can?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Cultural feedback loops. When we look at something that somebody says that they have a UFO sighting, so then they talk about it, Kenneth Arnold being one, and then the media reports on it, and then pop culture takes it and then emphasizes it. Spielberg does a movie, or entertainment, then media, then reports. So then people see it in masses, and then they start reporting that they've seen something else, but it keeps happening. And so the idea that is that later on, culturally, we've been affected by pop culture mainly, and then people start seeing stuff, but we kind of maybe expand on it, or what's the word? Geez. It becomes a little bit larger than life than what it is. And then people say that they've seen it. And then what happens is they go back, and then we just keep repeating itself and repeating itself.
Yeah.
For example,
Yeah.
Kenneth Arnold seeing the flying saucer, and then that shape of a flying saucer, then moving into now from, what we've seen that are like even triangle UFOs. And now we're getting into pyramids, we're getting into orbs. So we see that there's cultural feedback loops keep happening, and they're comments on society. There are always times for us, like during the Cold War, we were seeing different types of objects, and it really does relate back to who we are. So are philosophers even looking at cultural feedback loops, and maybe not even just within UFOs in general, and then how we perceive ourselves, and or maybe we're projecting what we're seeing? I'm just curious in the context, because
actually,
I don't always hear the philosophy side of this.
Yeah, of course. I think that's the most important part, frankly.
Yeah.
That's generally what my book was about, because I start, the first thing I ever published was basically about how supernatural belief is created through entertainment media, right? Even based on stories that were probably barely true. Okay. But then because of them being like The Conjuring, this is what I did during The Conjuring. It was part of my research, was that I wanted to see exactly how this belief proliferated. Okay. And I sure did get to see that. So then I took a lot, because, a lot of that goes through, there are mechanisms of belief about, and I don't think, movie makers do this on purpose. They're just trying to sell their movie, but they're taking historical events, and they're splicing them side by side, fictionalized events, so that they then, when we look at them, are, cognitively, we're believing them, even if they aren't true. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why in my book, I talk about hoaxes, like UFO hoaxes are more believed than actual anomalous UFOs, and so I've shown some pictures of things that, not pictures, actually videos of anomalous things in the sky that, people have looked at, people who know CGI, and they say, yeah, this is really weird. We don't know what it is, but it doesn't look like a UFO, like a Steven Spielberg UFO. Instead, it looks quite different, but it's definitely anomalous. And then you show them a hoaxed UFO, and they'll go for the hoax UFO and say, oh, that's the UFO, right? Because that's what we've been trained to see. So what you're talking about, these feedback loops, that's absolutely the case, okay? And that's definitely that's an engine of our belief. It's absolutely an engine of our belief. And I think that we have to be really careful, although I don't think we are going to be. I mean, that's the thing about like learning about all of this, is that you can say, oh, your belief is generated through everything that you see, and most of it is CGI, and it's not real. And nobody really cares, because they continue to kind of consume this, because this gives dopamine rushes, we're addicted to it. And so I think the kind of real stuff is boring to people, frankly. So yeah, I think that that's the case. But it's not when people ask me to talk on podcasts and such, these aren't the questions they generally ask. They're generally wanting to know, who's Tyler, and things like that. And, who are these people? And, tell us about the secret, people that do this research and everything. I guess that's the more interesting part to them. But I mean, the scariest part is basically how we are, that the creation of belief is so easy to do, and, so easily manipulated. And I think that this was, I end my book on a pretty sour, dour, scary note, right? Like, this is a warning to us, be careful, don't believe what you see.
Yeah. And you've led me in exactly to what I was going to say, because people say that seeing is believing.
Mhm.
And so we get into a point now where we have the government that has confirmed that UFOs exist and that we're looking into them. They're not saying we know what they are. We're just saying that there is something that does exist and they're looking into it. So where do we draw that fine line between seeing is believing and then becoming religion? Because does it now reconfirm for people that have, believe that UFOs and extraterrestrials are religion because they're actually seeing it now and the government's confirming it? Or can we still keep those separate? In my mind, I'd like to still keep them separate, but are we giving confirmation to those groups even more?
Yeah, so it's very few people that will keep these separate. And I wish that we could. I just don't think it's going to happen. And this is the reason I don't think it's going to happen, because even when we go to the movie and we say to ourselves consciously, I know, like with The Conjuring, say The Conjuring or The Exorcist or these kinds of movies, right? Where people go and they say, I know this is not real. Okay, I know it's made up, right? Or it's based on a true story, very lightly based on a true story. But our bodies still react to it. Our brains are still believing it on some level. And this is where it gets really scary. Memories are even being created. Okay. So the more immersive the environment, the more it's going to be part of our brain structure and even our culture. So we're going to remember things that are virtual and not even like in real life. So you see what I'm saying? That's kind of very, very, it's a very interesting place to be. Are we going to keep those distinctions? That's a great question. I don't have an answer to that. I do let in, I think it's chapter 3 of American Cosmic, where Scott Brown basically, at the end of that chapter, he basically says, I can't tell anymore, like, what's real and what's not. He's a CGI specialist. And he's basically, it's too good now. I just can't tell, like deep fake and everything like that.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really strong. And I've actually said that to a friend recently who's an editor. I said, we need more people like you within this community and just within the UFO community, looking at footage and being able to say that, this is, a deep fake, or this is because they're, seeing that type of footage all the time, or they're creating it themselves, or they're working with it. So I agree. We're getting into an interesting fine line. Diana, thank you so much for joining me. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. So I always say to everybody, thank you for being rebelliously curious with me as well.
Absolutely. It's fun. Thank you so much, Chrissy.
Thank you.